and David Mair, who comes from the European Research, Joint Research Centre of the European Commission, which is arguably the largest body in the world for thinking about science for policy advice. David.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you very much for inviting the JRC onto this panel. My boss, the Director General Vladimir Shuka, would have very much liked to have been here, but I don't know if many of you know, but now this is a very important moment in the changeover to a new commission, so it's probably not a good idea for a Director General to be outside Brussels at the other side of the planet at this particular moment. But this event is an absolutely crucial one for the JRC. I have a slide there which I won't talk about. That just gives you a couple of facts about what we do. But essentially, I want to tell you firstly a little bit about the nature of our organization, because I think we're a rather unique beast in the jungle of science advice to policy, and perhaps we don't fit into any of the models you've put forward. And then I have a few reflections at the end that are very much at the heart of our work on the practice and craft of science advice to policy and this issue of informal advice, how to do this better. So we are part of the European Commission, which is the executive arm of the European Union, and we are the in-house science service. We report to a commissioner, a lady called Mair Quinn, who is both the commissioner for policy for science at Europe, but also the commissioner for science for policy. And our job is to support and advise the rest of the Commission in putting forward its proposals and indeed in implementing its proposals. And I think it's fair to say that we are an organization that is only about science for policy. We are not a blue skies research institute. We only do science for policy. And our daily life is very much the life of post-normal science that you described. In fact, the concept post-normal science was invented by a JRC colleague. And therefore, the files that are crossing my desk and our desk are things like shale gas, biofuels, endocrine disruptors, redesigning the banking system in Europe to make it crisis-proof, nuclear safety and security, disaster relief and emergencies. And we are therefore an interesting organization. We are a boundary-crossing organization. We have one foot very firmly in the science community through our connections with scientists and the fact that most of my colleagues are scientists, but we also have another foot very firmly in the policy community. We are a full department of the European Commission, so therefore we have access to all the internal discussions in policy formation. We go to all the meetings, and JRC scientists interact with policymakers as peers. Some of us are permanent officials, some of us are temporary, but we act as peers with policymakers. So that, I think, is rather important. We pretty much do something for every single European policy you could name, although very clearly we don't do everything for all policies. And there are colleagues here, for example, from the European Food Safety Agency that does all the risk assessment work in relation to food, which we don't cover. But it's important to say we're not simply a curator of research. We do actually do a lot of research ourselves. We have a lot of laboratories and research infrastructures. So we practice as well as curating knowledge from the scientific community. And we have a very broad range of skills in the disciplines, ranging from the very hard natural sciences, nuclear physics and those sorts of things, down to social science, economics, those sorts of things. And we provide this advice in many different ways, working directly with the policy departments of the Commission, advising our Commissioner, and of course working with Anne Glover since she's been appointed. In respect of the scientific community, we are members of about 100 networks, scientific networks, and we have relations with about 1,000 scientific and research bodies around the world. And we can see that we are an organization that is more and more necessary in a multinational enterprise like the European Union, because you need somebody who is able to provide impartial advice that is free either from national interests or commercial or civil society interests. If we're trying to establish reference methodologies or measurement techniques or standards in a particular area, It's obviously going to be a bit different if you ask one national research institute to do something where there are very significant national interests in play. So that provides a lot of work. Simply you need to have a body that's able to produce neutral science that's above national or indeed commercial interests. One advantage we also have is that we are a full department of the Commission, but we have no policy brief at all. We don't do any policies, so therefore we are entirely policy neutral, which means that we can often play this role of an honest broker where different policies of the European Commission are intersecting. But also it means that we can increasingly support the important task of trying to join up different policies, because as I think, as you said very clearly, the challenges and problems we face no longer arrive in department-shaped boxes. On almost any given issue now that the Commission is discussing, you will find 5 or 10 different departments around the table. So we have a role at least to try and connect the evidence base and join that up. So even if the values and the policies are different, people are starting in the same place. So you might be thinking, we have the skills, we have a very good institutional setup, we have the capacity, we have the networks, so have we solved the problems of science advice to policy? Well, clearly we have not. And I think, therefore, there's an important lesson to draw out of this, that the challenges we are facing on science advice to policy are not going to be solved only by institutional and structural solutions. They're clearly necessary, but they're certainly not sufficient in our view. And this is where I come on to the challenges that we're thinking about in terms of practice and craft of science advice to policy. And that's my day job, is to put in place training and coaching and practical help to the scientists in the JRC to improve their impact on the Commission's policy process. And I think there are 4 challenges that we see on a very regular basis. The first one is the problem of timing. The policy cycle, if such a thing exists anymore, is clearly not synchronized with the research and science cycle. So it does happen that policy departments ring up and say, can you answer this question? And we say, yes, we can. That'll take us about 2 years. And they say, well, we were thinking of Monday, actually. I have had these conversations. So this is a real challenge for us, to make sure that when the policy issue arises, we are there with the science that people need. And this is not easy. Part of the challenge is that policy professionals and departments are not terribly good at thinking ahead into the future about what sort of knowledge they're going to need in 2 or 3 years' time. So we're working with them to try and change their time horizons so they think a bit more about this. And the work we do on foresight and anticipation are crucial to that. The second challenge that we face on a daily basis is how far should we go? What role should we play? We certainly aspire to the honest broker role. That's a core part of what we do, and that fits very nicely into the decision-making processes in the Commission. But it's not easy to fit into that role in practice. I hope we avoid stealth advocacy, because we are publicly funded officials and we can avoid that. More practically, what I find in my daily basis is that scientists are often uncomfortable in moving out of the pure scientist role into the honest broker role. So I often have to coax them, and I have lots of conversations when I say, look, the Commission is going to take a decision next week, whether we like it or not. So can we say something? And there's often a bit of reticence. Well, I haven't got the peer-reviewed publication out yet. I haven't got the Nobel Prize, so I'm not sure yet we can say something. But this is the reality of trying to find a comfort zone where people can play this role of honest broker. The third area where I think we have a major challenge is about communication. And in my experience, this is not a supply problem. I don't think having more scientists speaking for longer and producing more papers is going to solve the science advice to policy problem. It's a demand-side problem. Jeff Mulgan, who's written very interestingly on this subject, at a conference in Brussels the other day, said when he worked for the Prime Minister in number 10, 9 times out of 10, when he brought people in to visit the Prime Minister, he saw that they failed to connect with the Prime Minister because they showed absolutely no empathy for the constraints of the Prime Minister. And I think that is something where the science community needs to raise its game, to show greater intelligence and empathy for the constraints of the policy process. And here I think there is a real challenge and opportunity for the science community. The process is frustratingly fuzzy, I agree. What we desperately need is a robust empirical understanding of the policy process. There are fabulous scientists doing work on behavioral science, on decision-making under uncertainty, all these things. We're within touching distance of having a robust scientific account of the policy process. Personally, I don't think we'll make much more progress in science advice to policy until we have a more scientific understanding of what is this fuzzy process we're trying to change. Last point, interdisciplinarity. We all pay lip service to it. It's clear that unless you come with an interdisciplinary package to the policymakers, they simply do not know what to do with it. But in practice, this is very difficult and getting much harder. So we are thinking very hard about how to change the culture. The great expansion in science and the expansion in specialization is making knowledge deeper, but as it gets deeper, the barriers between the disciplines are getting higher. And there doesn't appear to be a good incentive within the scientific community to break down these barriers. These are not the people who appear to get to the top. So within my organization and generally, how we do that and how we develop the craft and practice of getting people in different disciplines to talk, I think is an absolutely urgent discussion, because we can't simply say it's important without coming up with some new ideas about how to do it. Thank you.